Why is change so ridiculously difficult? All right, so you want to know why it's so difficult to change in life, to change your mindset, to change anything about your life. The answer is there is a very specific science behind why it is that you just can't seem to get over certain things. Now, I want you to keep an open mind with me as I start talking about these things, because a lot of this topic is not very easy to wrap your head around, hence the fact that you are finding it so difficult to change certain things. But I'll be honest with you, I hear a lot of people talk on YouTube about why it's so difficult to change, how it's so difficult to change, and a lot of them say you have to alter your mindset, but at the end of the day, they don't really say why it is that it's so difficult. I've heard a few people really touch base on the topic, but not really get too in depth, and more so, they don't really have any relatable circumstances. Now, I will tell you, I'm one of those people that has found it incredibly difficult to actually change certain things about my life, change certain things about my thinking. I mean, I'm not kidding. If I could have, I would have changed so many things about my thought process in the past, but it just doesn't come easy. And when I hear people explaining it, a lot of times they talk to you about it like it's a matter of flipping a light switch, which we obviously know it's not like flipping a light switch. It actually takes work. The brain is like any other muscle. It requires that you invest some consistency, that you are consistent in the process of altering your thought process, which means a lot of times you have to take a step back from yourself and kind of analyze for yourself why it is that you feel the way that you feel, why it is that you're reacting to something in a certain way. You can't just be told, stop reacting to it, stop yourself from reacting to it, because honestly, if you're anything like me, you see red sometimes, you see black sometimes. Sometimes the emotional trigger behind an event is so severe that not only is the idea of, stepping back from yourself just difficult, it kind of pisses you off to have people tell you, just step back, just step outside yourself, refocus, just shift your mind. It's not that easy, all right? And I'll tell you guys, I've been there. I've been there so many times, whether it's jealousy, relationships in general, just in general thinking about people the way that I do, the frustration behind certain things like driving, the frustration behind why isn't this going that way? Why isn't this coming along? Why isn't this progressing as fast as I had hoped it would be? It's not that easy, and it's so exhausting to hear people just continue to say, shift your focus, think about something different, step outside yourself. It's true. You really do have to step outside yourself. But no, it's not an easy process. And I'll tell you why. So, listening to all the things that I listen to, and a lot of times, and there are some authors, there's some spiritual guys, there's some speakers that are just so influential, and their information is just gold. And if you haven't heard of them, Joe Dispenza is fantastic. He's one of those people who just happens to grab your attention, but it's not the fact that he's talking about what he's talking about. It's the fact that he's talking about something in such a way that it's so relatable, it's so easy to understand, yet it's often very much overlooked. A lot of people don't get his information. A lot of people don't seek his information. Instead, they're looking up content from people who are just spewing out garbage, and I've seen so much of it. And I know I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If you are an older person and you're looking to take advice from young people, don't do that. Now, if you're 65 and you're taking advice from me, I'm a 44-year-old guy, I get that. Sure, if you don't feel like I relate to you, if you don't feel like you relate to me, that's absolutely fine. Don't take my advice. But when you're somebody who's, in your 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever, and you're taking advice from somebody who's 22, 23 years old, you really got to put yourself in their shoes and think, would I have felt confident enough to give someone advice, especially life advice, at that age? Somebody who was twice my age. The answer is typically no. Why? Because somebody has had a certain amount of life experience. They know enough to know that what you're talking about is sometimes garbage. Sometimes it's just idealistic. Sometimes it's completely off the realm of reality. It just doesn't make any sense what they're saying. And it's because they're aspiring. It's not that they mean wrong. It's not that they have wrong intentions. It's just the fact that they lack a certain level of life experience. But anyway, coming back to the topic, Joe Dispenza talks about the mind-body connection. If there's anything that you take from this, I want you to take this piece of information, the mind-body connection. So not just in yourself, but looking at people in your life, looking at your relationship, looking at your children, you have to understand that we are a chemical process, right? There's so much of what's going on inside of our brains, inside of our body, that is the reaction of chemicals, okay? And I'm not just talking about, sugar. I'm talking about there are reactions, there's dopamine, there's serotonin, there's all these different things that your body's experiencing that is giving it certain reactions. And it might not even be a reaction that you necessarily feel all the time, but it's definitely giving you some kind of physiological response to this chemical reaction. When you smoke cigarettes, when you drink alcohol, when you consume sugary foods, yes, those all create a chemical reaction in the body, but it's not just those. It's not foods, it's not items all the time. A lot of times it's based on the ability to think a certain way. The way you think, your emotional reaction to something creates this chemical reaction. So in a very large sense, the way you are responding to something is almost like an addiction. So if you stay stuck in a certain mentality for an extended period of time, your body becomes addicted to that chemical process, much like it does with cigarettes, much like it does with alcohol, or almost anything. The ability to quit sugar is a very difficult thing for a lot of people because the body just craves it. For me, if I stop drinking coffee, a lot of times, for the first 3-4 days, I'll get headaches nonstop. I'll feel tired. There are so many things that your body responds to in a very physiological way that are chemically based. So when you sit there and you ponder certain scenarios, you can already tell from that moment whether or not your body is responding only based on what's going on up here. And what's going on up here is thoughts creating reactions. Those reactions are creating physiological response. Hence, if I sit here and I imagine my girlfriend cheating on me, if I imagine my girlfriend, going out on a date with another guy, I'll feel my respiration pick up. I'll feel my heart start palpitating. I'll feel my heart just start beating out of control. I will feel some kind of response. I'll feel rage coming over me. I'll feel, jealousy. I'll feel this very strong response to nothing more than a single thought, And a lot of people, this is exactly what they do. They sit here while they're driving, while they're working, while they're just walking around the house doing things, and they're focusing on a very negative aspect, right? They're focusing on their coworkers. They're focusing on an outcome that's not going their way. They're focusing on the traffic or their significant other. They're focusing on all these negative things that are creating these very negative responses in their head. And these negative responses are firing just like chemical reactions and creating a physiological response. So every time that you have a cigarette, in the beginning it feels not natural. In fact, it makes you sick. But the more you continue to smoke, the more you continue to push yourself through the process and endure that, it becomes an addiction. So your body starts to get used to that, to the point where when you finish eating, it wants a cigarette. When you finish doing some kind of physical activity, it wants a cigarette. When you wake up first thing in the morning, it wants a cigarette. Your body is programmed to respond to this stimuli almost like it's on a clock. It just knows, hey, about this time of the day, you should be expecting this. About this time of the day is normally when we have a cigarette, and I'm expecting my blood pressure to increase. I'm expecting my respiration to increase. I'm expecting my physiological body to almost behave as if it's at 5,000 feet pressure altitude right now, even though I'm at sea level. There are certain responses. So take that into consideration. And if you haven't listened to him, go listen to Joe Dispenza, because the way he talks about the mind-body connection is phenomenal. Which brings me to the next topic. So if you are somebody who's sitting there and you're thinking about these things, you're thinking about all these negative aspects, you're thinking about your relationship, about your job, about your coworkers, about traffic, you're thinking about all these negative things, your body's responding to that in a very negative way. Your body's responding to that physiologically, and the more you do it, the more your body becomes accustomed to it, which means the more your body becomes addicted to that chemical process created by thought reaction. And that means it's going to be that much more difficult to overcome. So, next step is shift to positive thinking. You have to do it. And I know I'm the same way. I hate it when people say just shift your thinking, just think about something else, stay positive. It's so annoying to hear people say that, but it is true. And it's going to take work. You're not just going to say, hey, my wife is cheating on me, I'm going to look at that in a very positive way. It doesn't happen. It's not going to happen. Hey, my coworker just got me in trouble because he's got a big mouth. I'm going to overlook that and stay positive. It doesn't happen. I'm right here to tell you, I'm human just like you. It's not going to happen. You're not going to sit there and look at that person and be like, cool. You might get there though. That's the positive thing. You might get there, but it's going to take practice. Just like any other muscle you have in your body, you really have to invest yourself continuously. You have to be very consistent with the process in order to get to that ideal end state, which means if you start on a regular basis to alter your thinking, to step back from your thinking. And again, it's not something that's going to come overnight. You really have to sit there and work on it day in, day out, sometimes twice a day. Really meditate, focus on adjusting that, because what'll end up happening is eventually you're going to start phasing out the negative reactions and you're going to start replacing those with positive reactions, even if it's only through thought. So just like Joe Dispenza says, if you want to know where your future is going, you have to create your future from the unknown. You have to literally go inside your mind, visualize this experience, which we call manifestation, visualize this experience, build this experience in your head. And I mean really go deep. I mean sit there and think. And again, just like meditation, it's not something you're going to develop overnight. People meditate for years. People meditate for weeks or months before they become proficient at it. I'm only up to meditating maybe 20-25 minutes at a time. It's very difficult. And I know other people who meditate regularly and say that it takes about a half hour just to be able to shut your mind off to get a successful meditation. So according to them, I wouldn't even be in that window yet. But what I want you to do is sit there and focus on creating an ideal outcome. And that doesn't mean try to see your wife with another man in a positive light, or try to see your coworker in a positive light, try to see the terrible traffic in a positive light. What I want you to do is not focus on any of that. Now, obviously, some things are not easy to discount, like your partner having an affair, your coworker constantly making your life more difficult, or your boss making your life more difficult, or just anybody in general making your life more difficult. Those things are not easy to overlook. But let's just say you don't have those, but you do have a tendency to react negatively to your environment, to people who annoy you, to friends, to scenarios. What you need to do is go inside your head and really focus. Sit there, start to meditate. What I typically do is I put on some meditative tones, just like heartbeat meditation tones. No words, no talking, just a steady heartbeat with some nice binaural beats in the background. A lot of times I can really get into the zone with that. And while you're in this process, what you need to do is just start visualizing. Don't go all over the place. Don't think, well, I want to take care of this and this and this. That's something I've done recently. And what I've realized is it's very difficult to direct your energy in 3 different directions or 4 different directions. Focus on one thing, build that one thing. If your goal is to have a different job in the next 12 months, start to see that. Really come inside your head, and just like they say, and it is true, start to put yourself in that moment. Feel what that moment would be like. Feel how things would be if you were in that scenario. Now, what you have to do, and I'm going to give you a shortcut to this, is ask yourself questions, all right? It's not enough to sit there and just force imagination, but if you really want to produce some questions, ask questions, or if you want to produce answers, ask questions like, how soft is the fur on a Labrador Retriever? Well, if I ask you that question, you start thinking about a Labrador Retriever. You trace it back to some point in your life when you pet a Labrador Retriever. You imagine yourself touching it, and now you know the answer to that question. You have to do the same thing with you. How would it feel if I had a job that paid twice what I pay right now? Well, man, that'd be magnificent, because I'd be able to take that extra money and finally update the bathroom that I wanted to update for the last few years. I'd be able to put that new roof on. I'd be able to get a replacement car. I'd be able to, get that LASIK surgery on my eyes that I've been dying to get the last 10 years, something. But just ask yourself questions, because that is going to position you in a different spot to where you're now producing answers. Your subconscious is producing answers. This is what you have to do. This is the path. You need to put yourself on a different track, because that negative thinking, that consistent negative thinking, all that was doing was producing a negative chemical reaction in your mind, which was creating this. You could literally sit there and produce a scenario in your head, feel your heart start beating, feel your palms start getting sweaty, and just work yourself up into a tizzy when nothing is literally happening to you. Picture going skydiving, right? You're going skydiving, you're getting in the plane, you start breathing deeply, you start getting nervous, you're getting up to the door, like it's time to go. They pull the door open, you feel the cold wind from outside, like everyone starts jumping out the door, and now you and your instructor are slowly like scooting toward the door. Your palms get sweaty, your respiration increases, your blood pressure increases, your heart starts beating really fast, and you are sitting on your couch or laying in your bed. You're just doing something very, very far away from that experience, but you're able to produce that experience in your mind and create a physiological response. So just like Joe Dispenza says, go into your mind, create positive scenarios, create a positive visualization experience, and get yourself used to the feeling of what it would feel like if you were already in that end state. That is what we call manifestation. That is what it's going to take to get you to the point of calming yourself down, of producing this positive chemical reaction rather than a negative chemical reaction. You have to be consistent in this process. You cannot just do it once and be done. You really have to sit there and give yourself a good amount of time. Try 30 days, try 60 days, 90 days. If you get to that point, you're doing this for 90 days, and you see that your attitude, your mentality is starting to shift. You see that things in your life are starting to shift. You know that it's working, but you first have to give yourself the opportunity to try it on a very consistent basis. So what I want you to do tonight is, before you go to bed, don't touch the iPad. Don't touch the phone. Put your phone down, put it on airplane mode, set the alarm, be done with it. Read a little bit if you're going to read, but not even the moment right before you go to bed, right when you turn off the lights. I want you to do it like 5-10 minutes before you go to bed. Close your eyes, lay in bed, slow your breathing, deep breaths, and just start focusing on what it is that you want. If you want a new job in the next year, focus on that. If you want your relationship to be in a different place, focus on that. Focus on the ideal end state. Focus on what it would feel like if you were already in that position. Do that on a very consistent basis, and what you're going to find is that your body starts to produce a positive chemical reaction. You're going to realize that when your heart starts beating, it's not beating out of fear or jealousy or intimidation or anything along those lines. It's beating because it's excited. It's beating because it's in love. It's beating for all the right reasons, not the wrong reasons. You're not putting yourself into this very stressful state, but rather this very euphoric state. And when you feel like you're already there, things will begin to change for you. That is the point where they say manifestation begins to occur, because you're keeping yourself on a focused track. Now, going back to the beginning of this is why you see people in your life. This is why you can't just have a conversation with someone and say, I would like you to see things differently. I really wish you would stop reacting this way. Well, to say that you wish they would stop reacting that way is ideal. It's ideal on your part, but it's not going to happen until they adjust their thinking. So If what they're doing is they're always reacting negatively, maybe your spouse comes home from work and they're just always in a bad mood, or your significant other goes out and they do this and they're always in a bad mood, or every time you're around your best friend, they have a tendency to dive into negative thinking. What you really need to do is just understand that process, and instead of saying like, man, you're always negative, or you're always getting so annoyed by your coworkers and it just affects us. Well, try not to be that way, because if it were as easy as just shifting your thinking in a matter of seconds, most people would do it. But they don't realize that what's going on is they literally have a physiological addiction to a chemical reaction that's occurring up here. They get triggered, they dive into their thoughts, they spend more time up here creating this fake scenario that's getting their body to react a certain way. Do that enough over time, it becomes an addiction to that behavior, to that thought process. So if you want to get somebody else over this, if you want to get somebody to shift their thinking, you got to be there by their side. You got to be there to help adjust them, to trigger them, to get them back on track, to really shift their focus. Or maybe even if you can explain this process to them, do so. And again, I encourage you, look up Joe Dispenza, look up anyone who talks about the same thing that Joe Dispenza does, because there is a huge significance behind mind-body connection. That's all I got for you today.